Welcome everybody. My name is Leslie Van Duzer and I'm the director of the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. I would like to thank Nancy and Niels, I'm not sure where they are, very much for hosting yet again another one of SALA faculty's book accomplishments. So we're thrilled to be here once again. Tonight we're celebrating the launch of a new book co-authored by Daniel Roehr and Elizabeth Fossman-Beck entitled Living Roofs in Integrated Urban Water Systems, published by Routledge, and it's hot off the press. It was published this year, 2015. You can get copies of it if they haven't sold out already here at the counter before you leave. So to facilitate a conversation between the authors and the audience tonight, landscape architect Cornelia Hahn Oberlander has agreed to moderate. And as Cornelia is no stranger to this community, we agreed that I can forgo Cornelia's rich biography with its countless accolades. But I would like to mention the great success she's had this year with the monograph on her work, authored by Susan Harrington, faculty member in SALA, called Cornelia Hahn Oberlander, Making the Modern Landscape. This is a book which is already amazingly in its third printing. Last I heard. So between the sales and the positive reviews and the reception she and Susan have received on their book tours in Canada and the United States, all of these speak volumes to Cornelia's international reputation and of course Susan's telling of her story. So congratulations, Cornelia. Tonight we celebrate author Daniel Roehr, who is an associate professor in the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. He's a registered landscape architect in both Vancouver and in Berlin. Daniel received his education in the UK and practiced for 16 years internationally, running his own firms in Berlin and Shanghai. His projects have spanned all scales, from private gardens to urban planning. Daniel's firm has garnered numerous peer-reviewed national and international competitions, many of those collaborative in nature. For over 20 years now, Daniel has been designing and researching living roofs, his most significant work being the groundbreaking water-sensitive living roof of the Daimler Chrysler project on Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. This project was completed in collaboration with such renowned architects as Renzo Piano, Richard Rogers, Arata Isozaki, Rafael Moneo, among others. While living and practicing in Germany, Daniel also taught as an adjunct professor and external examiner in Berlin. In 2007, he founded Greenskin Labs at UBC with Kevin Kong and Isabel Punig. The lab's awards generally support the collaborative research the team believes is so vital for achieving more rigorous and holistic results in increasingly complex landscapes. And so perhaps it should come as no surprise that Daniel would co-author this book with Dr. Elizabeth Fossman-Beck, a civil engineer who specializes in urban stormwater management using green infrastructure technologies. After 10 years as an academic at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, last year Elizabeth joined Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. Elizabeth's research team in Auckland was tasked with making living roofs an accessible technology for managing stormwater. The result was numerous academic publications, but perhaps more importantly, a living roof stormwater technology design manual based on almost 8 years of hands-on research in the lab and field and practical experience gained through the construction of 5 living roof systems. The American Society of Civil Engineers recognized discoveries made by Elizabeth and her research partner, Dr. Robin Simcock, with the Wesley W. Horner Award in 2014. Elizabeth serves the civil engineering profession through leadership roles in the American Society of Civil Engineers and on the International Water Association's Joint Committee on Urban Drainage. So please welcome our panel tonight, and I will pass this off to Cornelia.
So but now we are all here. And I'd like to ask Daniel and Elizabeth, please, when and how did you both got interested in living roof design?
Do you want to start?
Oh, I think my response is probably short and sweet. My mother told me to do it. I'm totally serious. My mom is just like everybody else's mom who clips out newspaper articles and sends them to you, and I see lots of other women nodding. And she started sending me articles from her gardening magazines about living roofs and how they manage stormwater. And she said, this is a gardening magazine, and you're the engineer, and you do stormwater, so is that really true? And so I did it because my mother told me to.
That's fantastic.
And that's really the truth.
That's contrary to what my mother told me. My mother told me to hybridize asters on our farm in New Hampshire, and I said no. So, and Daniel, how did you two get together?
Well, I just wanted to say one word about how I got into green roofs. I put that little slide up there. That was the first initiation on green roofs. I did this sketch in Japan when it was like 26 or 27 for a project, a research engineering project on a big railway station for Sapporo, and that enticed me to get into green roofs. So this sketch up there is like 23 years ago. That was my first connection to green roofs. The way we both got together, I think we met partially through Ed Snodgrass, but we also met at a LID conference. So we presented a few times at low impact development conferences for stormwater management, which are from the Engineering Society organized in the United States.
Yes, that's very excellent. And you know that green roofs are most likely the most important feature in landscape architecture today, because if we have a lot of green roof, we might be able to save the infrastructure for having to be either made bigger or renewed. So I'd like to hear from you, Elizabeth. What are the reasons for your interest in living roofs?
I guess it does go after my mother told me to look at them, and I started to, as an academic, do what we do, go look up in journals, go look up to see what research has been done, and found that at the time, so this was around 2004 or 2005, that the research that was out there was not being done from my technical perspective. Am I the only civil engineer in the audience? Possibly. I'm really outnumbered. Strength in numbers. A lot of what I read about was from a horticultural perspective, from a landscape architecture perspective, and there were claims about managing stormwater. And it wasn't done in my language or in a way that I understood, or in the way I think the civil engineering infrastructure people, the kinds of numbers that we need and operate under. And so that's really what got me into it, and thought, well, here's an opportunity. And I just thought it was a cool idea.
And you know, when we did Robson Square and the Vancouver Public Library, that is in the 70s for Robson Square, and in the 90s, we just tapped in the dark, you know, and we hope that we survive. And so this book is of great importance to elevate the minds of the municipalities and the engineers. And I see a great future for this book.
Wow, thank you.
So Daniel, your interest in living roofs is to see something nice.
Well, that's why I put this slide up. I think I have one more. For me, the living roofs, that started with this Potsdamer Platz project. It had two reasons why we were doing it. The first reason was obviously to do something attractive, aesthetically pleasing, but the major reason was the green roofs had to be installed on the Potsdamer Platz as a system to not create sewage overflow because
yes.
of the stormwater control. And that got me very enticed into the field. So I looked at the aesthetics first as a designer, but what I was really interested in understanding the science behind it. And when we did the Potsdamer Platz with Herbert Dreiseitl on the ground doing the water feature, we had to develop a system which works holistically, you know, recycling the water.
It's right over the garage.
Yeah, it's right
so
over the garage.
So you had to know a lot about waterproofing.
Waterproofing,
and there was Herbert Dreiseitl who helped you.
He helped me, and he wanted nutrient-free water, which was very difficult to collect if the roof is green, because it needs nutrients to actually produce. So what we did, and I have a slide for that too, we started rigorous research with Marco Schmidt, who was at that time one of the only people who was involved in the soil science. And that's how I got actually enticed in academia, because before that I was a designer. And so I was really starting to get interested in what Elizabeth is doing.
And that is very exciting. You see, you had that chance early on to work on a green roof. So now, what started you to write this book? Elizabeth.
I think mostly because we didn't know how to talk to each other. And from a professional standpoint, there are so many different things that you can do with a living roof, right?
Oh, yeah.
So many different objectives for what you might achieve. And sometimes they're competing objectives, like what Daniel just mentioned with nutrient-free runoff. Nutrients and runoff are a major problem for a stormwater engineer. I mean, that's mostly what we're trying to get rid of. So, you know, you have these competing objectives, and to make the system work, to do what we all want it to do, we need to work together. And I don't as a civil engineer, I don't necessarily know what a landscape architect's objectives are, and I think vice versa. And but that also extends to the horticulturalists and every other sort of profession that's involved in this, in what's really a very complicated system. So I think one of the big reasons for writing the book was to kind of come up with a common ground, or at least there are a lot of checklists in the book, and kind of explain to each other what the other profession is thinking about.
Yeah, and also in this book to make people understand that there are certain plants that don't need fertilizer, and you don't want that runoff. Like at the Vancouver Public Library, my plants don't need any fertilizer. That is very important, but that was never documented because I never have time to do such a good job.
Well, when my research team started in Auckland, you know, we were given this blank slate, just figure out how to make it work. And New Zealand is just this tiny little country at the end of the earth. You know, everything is imported. Oh, you have very limited natural resources, and if you want to create something that doesn't cost $1 million, you have to figure out how to work with what you have. And to do that, and so that was how we set out. And I guess maybe I could.
Yeah. This one. This one. Yeah. This one.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Along the way, you know.
Yeah.
You know, we had to. So that's me at the quarry. You know, it was everything from working in the lab to going to the quarry and saying, I want this, this, and this, and then building a system, a full roof, and then finding out it's not working the way we want it to work, and then going back and doing it again. And then now I've lost my train of thought because I got sidetracked on this. But we went back and forth between figuring out how to make this thing do what we want it to do with the resources we have available to us, which were really limited. But because there was, that's where I started, because there was nothing to begin with, we documented everything. And we fortunately had a really understanding municipal government who was funding the research, who let us do that. And so we wrote down everything. Well, as much as we could anyway.
Good for you. And Daniel, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I think for me, I totally agree. I always remember that when I wrote some of the first drafts, and Elizabeth said, "What do you mean by aesthetic?" could you be a bit more precise? So that's how it started, and I said, well, you know, so we had some real conversational difficulties because we engineers talk in a very precise language.
Yes, and they
we are
want
more
everything research,
very strict and
while
very
we
research.
designers dream.
We dream, and particularly I dream a lot. So it was quickly apparent that that was going to be a challenge, and that's why it took quite a long time to actually write the book. But what was a real interesting part for me was that I felt, also through the experience with the Potsdamer Platz, you need to work with an engineer, and not at the end, but right at the beginning. And that's what the book is trying to address.
Yes.
That these professions, a couple of others which are in
yes.
there, which need to work from the beginning to have a good concept, because on the Potsdamer Platz that didn't happen. So the structural engineer designed the roof, and then I was called in, and then he said there's not enough, you can't put enough loading on it. While if the structural engineer would have been there with me at the beginning, it would have worked better. So
This
that's
is
what
why
interests us.
I think that we can only achieve a good green roof if we collaborate as a team with the engineers from the very beginning, because otherwise this doesn't work. We have to know the loads right away, and we also have to know what we want to achieve, and that can only be through a collaborative process.
Even with my research partner in Auckland, Dr. Simcock, is a soil and plant scientist. So you would have thought soil science, engineering, you know, it's similar. It was actually a year into the project, and we were having this conversation, and both of our eyebrows were furrowing more and more through this one conversation. We said, wait a second. You draw a picture of what you think you mean, and I'll draw a picture of what I mean. And we're using the same words to describe a system.
Yes.
Well, we thought we were using the same words, and our pictures were totally different. So even within soil science and engineering, we were not speaking the same language. And so the first thing that we did was we actually wrote a glossary. Like, we wrote down a set of definitions to say, we need to start getting on the same page. And then you add a landscape architect into it, and it's all over again. It's different.
That was a challenge. It really was.
Yes, and then I don't call the soil for roof soil.
No.
It's called a growing medium.
That's right.
And it's composed of various particles, most likely just lightweight. Growing medium would be lava, rock, some composted material, and sand. So this is simplified, of course, but for each task you have to redefine this, and therefore you have to work in a team. And this is why this is so good, this book.
Thanks. I wouldn't put sand in it.
No?
It's heavy. Sand is heavy.
No. It's very important because it aerates this growing medium. And the lava rock isn't enough.
Well, so it turns out in New Zealand, we're lucky because it's a volcanic country, so we have pumice deposits of all gradations. So we actually have pumice sand. So it's different than marine sand.
Different here. So you started to collaborate on the book, and you then decided that you had to write this book in order to show us what can be done.
It was Daniel.
Yes.
He
So
said we should
Daniel,
write a book.
Make that, tell us about your big decision.
Well, I was approached at one of the conferences in architecture. They liked an article I'd written to write a book. And then I said, oh, writing a book, that sounds a big challenge. And then I said, could I write something on the green roofs? And then I realized I need to have collaboration here. Most of my work is collaborative, even on the Potsdamer Platz. As landscape architect, you need architects, you need structural engineers, you need all the other envelope planners, everything.
Yes.
So because I knew Elizabeth through her work and we had met a few times, I gave her a call, and it took a bit of convincing to say that we need to do this because, you know, engineers are strong people and they have their own mind and their own will, and I come along with my artsy idea of, you know, writing a book. But we found a common ground, and then we had some people look at our abstracts. For example, Dr. Robinson Cox, she said, you have to do it, it's really important, there isn't a book out there. So we also looked what's out on the market, and there is not one book on stormwater research on green roofs in the English language. In German there is some stuff, but it's in German and it's not peer reviewed, and it's now 20 years
It's not
old.
applicable here.
Yeah, and it's not applicable here because of the climate, and also it's 20 years old. So we wanted to really do something rigorous and up to date, and that was the reason.
So now you have teamed up, and what have you learned while you wrote this book? Because it was a hard road to hoe.
You can go first.
Okay, we had dinner yesterday, and I said, I miss these regular Skype calls, critiquing and discussing, because for 4 years, it's like a marriage. You on the phone all the time, and you have to, if you do it really in depth, you have to really critique each other. So as you know, in a marriage, there's always a give and take. And if you want to write a serious piece of text, it's good to have somebody who critiques. So that was the biggest challenge, and Elizabeth is an amazing critique. So I had to, it was hard. It was hard.
So diplomatic
but
of
it was
you.
very diplomatic. But it was challenging, but it was good because I don't have a PhD and I can draw, but writing is a very different, particularly scientific
This
writing.
is why every student in landscape architecture should take a basic course in English, literature and writing. You see?
And Germans write long sentences, which
Yeah.
you know, so I had to get very concise.
Yeah.
So,
You see?
engineers write, so it was a big learning curve. But
Yes.
because of
So
that,
it was a big learning curve.
yeah, huge.
Yes. And so what do you think are the biggest challenges for making living roofs, assuming we agree that they should be done? And how does the book contribute towards this goal? So Elizabeth, tell us first, and then Daniel.
There are a couple of practical challenges in making living roofs a mainstream technology, and some of that, just strictly speaking, is cost still. And certainly, even if it's that the perception is that the cost is much higher.
No.
Whether or not it's right, there is
Yeah.
a perception that the
But
cost will be higher.
the developers should be taught that the green roof is part of their development.
I don't disagree with you, but with any new technology, there's a huge learning curve. You know, I look at this as a technology, and really from that standpoint, any sort of green infrastructure technology has a long way to go before the developers are saying, yep, except for some of the really advanced design firms that are here in this room. So those are the exceptions, not the rule. So there's some practical challenges. And then the other fundamental challenge I think that we tried to be really honest about in the book is the difference between what we know in our gut these
Yes.
systems do versus what we can prove now with measurements and with the extent of the research. So my research on green roofs has been all about measuring things. We've measured how much rainfall and runoff occurs. We've measured on multiple systems. We've measured how much evapotranspiration happens at different times and under what conditions. We've measured water quality, and we've tried to link the design of an individual system to that effect.
Yeah.
And we've measured biodiversity and habitat creation. You know, we've tried to measure everything that we could, but the fact remains that every living roof, it's a living system. And there are, as an engineer, I want to control the outcomes, and it's a living system, so there's only so much that you can do. And that's a really new thing for an engineer to deal with. And so to try to come together to say, here's what we know it does, but at this point, this is only the extent to which I can prove it. There needs to be a lot more research done to try to, prove that gut feeling and put the numbers to it, because that's what's defensible in a legal standpoint.
Yes, and the trouble is the city engineers are not quite there yet.
Not at all.
No, they are far away.
Yeah.
Yes, and so you have a huge job ahead of you with this. And Daniel, what do you
I
think?
think there are two big challenges. The first one is to get, and I have a little movie at the end after I will show you, it's 3 minutes, to entice the public on engaging with living roofs. Because if the public doesn't accept it, how would they take tax for actually getting green roofs built? So I think that's one of the big issues, to get the public enticed, the general public. And the biggest other factor, I think, is how we can keep up with calculating LID systems as a whole, because of the climate changing and
Yes.
the weather going crazy everywhere. It's really hard even for the engineers to predict the future of these systems, how they will work. So to keep up that level is, I think,
So
one
on
of the
your
biggest
team,
challenges.
you need not only an engineer, but you need a climate
Yeah.
change
That's right.
a person, like the man in Potsdam at the Climate Change Institute,
Mhm.
Mr. Schnellnhuber.
Mhm.
You need somebody like that. I don't know if you know about that, but there in
Mr.
Potsdam
Schnellnhuber.
is a climate change office that is run by a physicist, and probably those people know more about climate change than anybody else. And you need such a team. Mhm. Yes. So but let's hope that our city one day will have a good team and we'll have lots of green roofs. So the book will contribute towards the goal of having green roofs. That's my wish. And tell us, what are your next projects?
Well, I've moved country, moved university, and so I'm just in the last year, so I'm starting over. And what I'm trying to do is get some living roofs built on my campus
Oh, good. Excellent.
and create more research opportunities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you, Daniel, want to design more beautiful things with sketches.
Well, I would like to write a book on analytical drawing, that's true. And the other thing is I would like to, and I'll show you this little movie in a minute, to find methods how to entice the public to accept green roofs.
Yeah.
So my research is still focusing on LID, and this is why I put up that sketch behind you, or that little drawing, that how do we get people accept that that is the new measure for designing urban space. And, but from a visual point of view, because that's what we as architects, landscape architects, can do, while Elizabeth is much better in calculating than me, and I've learned over the book writing that I should keep my calculation explorations to myself, because that's a totally different level they work
Would you
at.
like to take 2 questions from the floor?
Yeah,
Because that would engage the audience.
yes. If there's a question.
If there is a question. Oh,
So this is for Elizabeth. So as a practitioner trying to kind of advance like low impact development in our projects, I find the engineering piece is probably the most challenging part of it, to get the support for that. Because oftentimes it's like you're asking the engineer to design as little infrastructure in the project as possible, right? Which kind of, I find, often goes against their traditional infrastructure. Like, you're designing infrastructure, but it's green infrastructure, but it doesn't look like infrastructure to them.
Mhm.
And, do you have advice on how to introduce these ideas with engineers and help to broaden the discussion, I guess?
Keep trying. I mean, honestly, the face of civil engineering changes. Civil engineering, I think of as one of the oldest professions, not the oldest, but one of the oldest. And the civil engineering profession has historically been very conservative and dominated by a certain type, and very conservative and very stubborn. This is how we do it. And you go to these LID conferences or within the civil engineering profession, that's changing. And I teach a course in stormwater design and green infrastructure, low impact development design. And in the 10 years that I've been teaching the class, you know, the students have summer internships and they're working in design firms, and they come back and they say they don't know about this, or they said no. And but that's changing, and my advice has always been just keep trying, because as more and more of the younger generation grows up with this or learns about it, you know, there is a natural succession. And we just have to keep pushing the ideas, but we also need the evidence, the numbers that say this actually works. One of the things to me that's really exciting about going back to the US at this point, because obviously I'm not from New Zealand, otherwise I would sound a lot cooler right now, but one of the things about going back to the US is, you know, regulation is driving green infrastructure implementation, absolutely 100%. And as more and more evidence supports the fact that low impact development or green infrastructure is more cost effective and technically achieves better goals, you know, it's being proven more and more that hard gray infrastructure cannot achieve the technical goals that are set. So if you look at New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, Seattle, the economic argument's been made and the technical argument has been made that you have to do it with green infrastructure. So you need the examples of those billion-dollar investments that are happening in those major cities. So some of it is, so the big role of regulation, big role of regulation and environmental protection laws, big role of the examples, leading by example, and educating the younger generations, and being patient, sticking to your guns.
Well, that's
A long answer, I'm sorry.
that's a long way to go,
Yep.
but we have to do it. And I do think there is so much hope in the younger generation that they will be able to elevate the minds of these other people.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping. And
I
how
have a
about-
couple of things I would like to say, and hopefully this works. Yeah. When you do a book like this, and I think this is also important for the young design profession today, you cannot, because the complexity of landscape architecture and architecture is getting so complex, you can't do it on your own. And I really want to, these three people here on the board, Robin Simcock and Kevin Kong, my research partner, and Andre Bill, former student of ours in architecture, really thank all three of them wholeheartedly, because it is really important to say, you know, we've been the major authors, but you cannot write a book with that rigor with a big team. So what I wanted to say with this, I want to entice the young generation to go out there, find colleagues, and really do the research together, because I think the research will get more rigorous through this process. And I just wanted to acknowledge these three people. They're also acknowledged in the book, what their duties were. So I just wanted to say thank you to all three, Robin, Kevin, and Andre.
We want to say
We
thank you.
wanted to say that.
And I would like to thank you too for having been able to air your ideas.
And I have one little thing to show you. It's 3 minutes, and I hope it works. Let's see.
You own your home and you care about the plants, animals, and people that depend on a healthy water network. But you're concerned that your property can't support a healthy ecosystem. Every time it rains, your rooftop and paving inhibit water from seeping into the ground. By funneling into pipes, we deplete the groundwater table. And across the scale of the neighborhood, city, and region, water that once slowly entered rivers and streams is instead quickly expelled into waterways, greatly increasing water velocity. This contributes to flooding, habitat destruction, erosion, and drought, problems that are becoming increasingly more prevalent. Green infrastructure can solve many of these costly problems with 5 simple tools. They collect, infiltrate, and consume rainwater right where it lands, mimicking the natural system. Swales are shallow channels in the lawn or boulevard that direct water, and unlike pipes, they use gravel, rocks, or vegetation to slow water velocity and allow water to filter into the ground naturally. Rain gardens are like regular gardens, but are sunken into the ground and lined with organic material to gather and infiltrate water. Rain barrels and cisterns collect rainwater. They can be above or below ground and retain water for later use on your lawn or landscape. Concrete and asphalt alternatives like permeable pavers and gravel walkways and driveways reduce impermeable paved areas, allowing water to filter back into the groundwater table. Green roofs are vegetated surfaces that add biodiversity and habitat for birds and pollinators. Green roofs also extend the life of your roof by protecting it from solar radiation. They insulate homes, moderate temperature, and reduce your energy bills. Landscape architects and hydrological engineers can design a system based on your regional conditions to ensure that the water leaving your yard mimics the natural landscape before your home was built. All 5 green infrastructure tools connect to the municipal storm system to keep your property protected, even during extremely heavy rainfall events. A single-family lot can receive up to 500,000 liters of water each year. Green infrastructure treats this as a resource for wildlife and people alike, rather than a costly problem. Applied throughout neighborhoods and cities, green infrastructure can raise property values, reduce infrastructure taxes, combat the urban heat island effect, and better support the plants, animals, and people impacted by you. Help create a healthy water network.
Thank you, everybody.